This week's guest is Hugh Newman. Hugh is an author, conference organiser, world explorer, tour host and megalithomaniac. As an author, he has researched the Indigo child phenomenon and published a book on the subject. His most recent book, Earth Grids, has been published by Wooden Books, and he's released numerous DVDs of his multimedia presentations as well. He has articles published all over the place, and as well as organising the Megalithomania conferences, he has spoken at events in the UK, Malta, France, Peru, Egypt, Bosnia and North America, among others. He has also appeared on BBC TV, Sky Channel 200, Bosnian TV and the History Channel in the last 3 seasons of Ancient Aliens. Overall, he's a man with a finger in many, many pies, and it's a great pleasure to have him on Alchemy Radio. Hugh, how are you? Good to talk to you.
Very well, thank you very much.
I suppose before we delve into the meaty stuff, one of the questions that I ask most of our guests on the show here is, how did it all begin for you? How did you get from where you were to where you are now?
Well, to become a certified megalithomaniac, it took quite a long route through various different subjects. One of the passions I had many years ago was the crop circles of England, going back 15 or even 20 years. I think was the first one. 18 years was the first one I saw, and obviously, a lot of people don't realise this is one of the most incredible, strange, modern phenomena. The most strange, the most interesting. And I knew some of them were real because there's a history of them going way back, hundreds, if not thousands of years. So I got drawn into this megalithic arts and sciences and all the things I research now through the crop circles. Because once you start getting your head into those, you quickly realise that they contain geometry and measurement systems. They're always on ley lines, they're near ancient sites, they're all in the vicinity of Avebury, Stonehenge and places like that, and it kind of drew me into the sacred landscape, and that's how I started to become this obsession with megaliths and ancient sites. So it was really through that was the main sort of driving force that drew me into this strange world of ancient mysteries.
And how strange and fascinating it became. When you were young, I mean, growing up or maybe in school, was there any kind of an indication? Did you have any kind of leaning towards that was a little bit less mainstream, or was it more or less in later life?
It was mainly a little bit in later life, but I had this quite strange story from my mum, which I'm happy to mention on the radio, I guess. Is that when they were actually pregnant with me, my mum and dad, they used to go around in a camper van. And the time they were pregnant with me, when I was a couple of months before I was born, they were going around the West Country, Stonehenge, Avebury and all this stuff. And they don't really know why they went there. But I remember once, my mum told me this, I don't remember this obviously, is that I started kicking at a certain time when they were trying to find somewhere to park up for the night. And they pulled over in this random car park, didn't know where they were. Eventually I stopped kicking, went back to sleep, and in the morning they woke up and there was this big conical hill right behind them, and they parked up right next to Silbury Hill. So there's extremely early indication of my megalithic passion going way back then. But it wasn't during my school years. I got incredibly bored by learning history. It was just basically the dinosaurs, a load of Stone Age savages, then the Romans, then the kings and queens. So it's not really the most exciting subject when you're at school. However, it was really, like I say, the crop circles, and it was the study of earth energies really opened my eyes to the more mystical side of history, the more esoteric and the secret history of the ancient Britain and other sites around the world. So you get drawn into it in strange ways, but once you're in it, that's it for life, it seems.
Well, you mentioned you're a certified megalithomaniac, and I'm sure there is a cert for that, but what made you decide to really take this seriously, and that this was going to be your life passion and you were going to just go for this hell for leather? Because it has become an obsession, a healthy obsession in my book, but an obsession nonetheless.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was actually, I worked with a guy called John Martineau, who's a publisher and brilliant geometer. He was also into crop circles and megaliths and stuff like that. When I moved to Glastonbury about 10 or 12 years ago, but I was kind of studying it. I was reading up on it. I was writing articles about it before then. But then when we decided to start the Megalithomania conferences, then that's when it really kicked off. And I was organising talk spaces and lectures and like whole areas, like outdoor festivals for several years before that, the Big Green Gathering, Sunrise Celebration, other events. And we had all these amazing speakers on megaliths, and crop circles and UFOs and all this amazing stuff. But it was really when I started doing a Megalithomania conference, then it kind of clicked that there's a real kind of almost like a movement of Megalithomania. People really want this. They want to kind of have access to sites. They don't want to feel like they're just listening to academics. They want to kind of feel a more antiquarian kind of vibe, which is to do with just the love of the ancient sites, and a passion. You don't have to have qualifications. You don't have to have, master's degrees in archaeology to appreciate it and research it. And it's from that kind of angle which really got me. And it's really inspired by John Michel, to be honest with you, who's, a massive inspiration for me and many other people. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 or 4 years ago, and he triggered the beginning of the conference and my kind of seriousness about the subject.
Tell us a little bit about John Michel, because his name crops up on this show from time to time, but we've never actually spoken about him in any kind of depth before.
John Michel was like a visionary author. In the 1960s, he came out with the flying saucer vision, questioning what UFOs really were they light phenomena, were they figments of the imagination or something else, and why did they follow ley lines? And then he kind of did this classic breakthrough book which opened up the door for a lot of other people, which is The View Over Atlantis, where he really questioned the ancient science, went into more mystical things, geometry, the megalithic science of Alexander Thom, ley lines, and this sort of enchantment of the landscape. And this whole kind of ancient philosophy kind of emerged from his writings, and it really blew people's minds, basically. This is obviously before I was born, but it really kind of opened the door for a lot of people. And then he wrote 30 or 35 classic books, many of them 12 Tribe Nations. He even wrote a book called Megalithomania, which is where we took the name from for the conference, and he encouraged us to do so. He wanted us to use the name, in fact, and he was a speaker at the first 2 or 3 conferences before he died. So the legacy is kind of living on, we hope, within the conference and in some of the projects and the way we operate, thanks to people like John Michel.
There is so much going on, Hugh, at the moment. I mean, you guys are so active, and you're becoming more and more progressive, I think, in your approach as well. And having experienced one of the conferences, the most recent Origins conference, I have to say there's a big difference in the way you present your information from the way a lot of other people do. And what I mean by that, I mean it as a positive, in that there's a more relaxed air to your style of presentation and to a lot of the guys you're working with on a regular basis. And it's much easier for somebody who might be new to the information to become absorbed in it and to really feel that there's something something good going on and something entertaining, as well as being just hard data. I mean, there is all that the hard data is there in your work, but it's presented in an entertaining manner. And I was very, very struck by that, and it was something that really resonated with me after the Origins conference. Is that the kind of feedback you are getting to the work that you're doing over the last couple of years and beyond, or what kind of feedback do you generally get?
Yeah, no, pretty much. That's a good way of putting it, actually. I mean, this is like the antiquarian kind of approach, I think, where it's to do with the passion for the sites, the sort of love of these ancient sites and all related subjects that are often overlooked by academia. And I must admit, I mean, academia is accepting things like archaeoastronomy now, and there's a lot of science and tests being done on Earth energies, and even on the alignment of sites, ley lines and things like that. So, yeah, we do kind of have that kind of angle. I mean, certainly personally, but I find that there's so much amazing information and sites out there. I mean, often my presentations are just describing places I've visited and just the basic research that's been done on them. You don't need to have, in these lectures or whatever, you don't need to have a grand theory trying to prove a point. Often just showing people pictures and describing what happened and the sites and what's been discovered is mind-blowing enough, really, at some of these sites there are around the world, and often people don't get a chance to find out about them. I mean, it's the same in many different subjects. This research I've been doing on these giant skeletons in North America and other places, it's the same. You don't need to kind of try and prove a point that they were from a certain place. You just go, this is the evidence, and that's mind-blowing enough. And I think that's the kind of approach that kind of needs to take place. We don't need to try and prove, grand theories, although that comes into it. A theory might develop, but I get frustrated sometimes with speakers and authors who just have a grand theory and just only put in the evidence that supports that particular theory, and then miss out all the other stuff that contradicts it. And so I think there's a certain approach which is a bit more relaxed, but you can pack a lot of information into one lecture, and people are a bit gobsmacked by the end of it, regardless.
Personally, I'm testament to that. I thought the Origins conference was amazing. So I suppose the work that first drew your work to my attention was your book, The Psychic Children, Dolphins' DNA and the Planetary Grid, and the work that you did on indigo children. And we will talk about Earth Grids, your most recent work, and lots more besides as the conversation progresses. But let's talk about DNA and the indigo children and what exactly indigo children are first. I think it's a good place to kind of start delving into the meatier aspects of our talk.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, the reason I kind of got into this was kind of as I was getting into all this more ancient mysteries stuff many years ago. I was just kind of had some friends and their kids, and I kind of looked after the kids, babysat them sometimes, and I just noticed these kids were amazing. One of them was like really intense, powerful warrior style, like 5-year-old kid who was really good at chess and things like this. And another one who was much more like a healer, intuitive, very spiritually kind of intelligent. And I kind of realized there's something going on. So I did a bit of research on it, and there was this phenomena of these indigo kids. And this was all, 15 years ago when I was first started researching this. And eventually I went to this conference in Hawaii, the Psychic Children Speak to the World conference, organised by James Twyman and his group. And I met some more of these kids, and I was completely stunned by what was going on. They're just like old souls. They're like old masters from various, Native American, Tibetan traditions who are reincarnating into these kind of young bodies with all this high knowledge from an extremely early age. Some of them just have extremely amazing gifts, really, that they, to do with all the different psychic and telekinetic abilities, but also the intuitive side and the clairvoyant side as well. And so it just seems like there's been a whole process over the last maybe couple of decades now, where a lot of these indigo kids or these psychic children are coming through, and they're being born and they're coming in, and it could be because that has to happen now, because there needs to be a kind of consciousness wake up call for humanity, because the nature of reality with all the governments and destruction and corruption and things like that is just people are over it. It's not interested anymore, and these kids are so pure. They're like they can't be corrupted. Their integrity is very, very strong, and hopefully this will be a kind of a shift in consciousness of the planet, and if enough of them are coming through, being born and everything, then eventually we'll reach that level of consciousness that humans really should be at, rather than be controlled, manipulated, and sort of having this sort of almost like a black sheet over the whole world. So hopefully things will change, and maybe they're the answer. Maybe they're going to come through and get into places of power, and make some changes that are most needed.
And people have been speaking about indigo children from the 1970s, I think, perhaps even before that. But from the research I've done, it seems to be from about the 1970s. So is it limited to children? Do these kids seem to lose their special abilities, or do they carry them on into later life?
Well, I think that just depends on their environment and their, parents and schooling and things like that, and their peer groups and stuff like that. So it varies. It just varies because often many of us, if not all of us, have these potential abilities. We do have them. It's real. It's not, it's there. It's just a case of if they're developed and seen at the right time. Whereas most these really special, interesting kids have them strong. They're really, really powerful people, old souls who've been through it all and know what's what. From within a couple of years of being born, they know what's going on, kind of thing. So it really depends on their environment and the way they're brought up, I think, because often you can have it sort of taken out of you as you grow up and you're conditioned a certain way, but if it's worked with and developed, I think it could be a life-changing and a culture-changing experience.
And I find it interesting as well because a lot of people say there's a thin line between genius and madness, and there's so much talk at the moment about the likes of autism and whether there's a link to vaccines and all these new so-called diseases such as attention deficit disorder, all this kind of thing. And a lot of science, hard science, or the medical establishment would say that, hang on a minute, this is absolute nonsense. Indigo children, it's just an excuse that parents use if their child is autistic or on the autistic spectrum in a way, perhaps, or it's just a way for them to cover up some kind of learning disability. But anybody who speaks anecdotally about indigo children and interaction that they've had with them say that there's something much, much more powerful at work, that's really just a kind of a brushing under the rug from an agenda-led industry. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said, to be honest with you. It's almost like the schools and society as it is doesn't know what to do with these kids who've got these abilities, and sometimes, you know, they may not show these what we class as psychic abilities, and often ADHD is a big problem. But I think that's because it's the way they're being taught, and I think they've got to keep up with the kids rather than try and control the kids, feed them Ritalin to slow them down into the way they are being taught, the syllabus at schools and stuff like that. So I think it's a time for a change. And you get these, you know, excellent schools like Steiner schools, for instance, who actually are aware of this, and they take that into account, and they allow the creative side, which is often what's needed with ADHD kids, to come forth. And so, you know, it really depends again on the environment, and I think these Steiner schools and other schools are really the key to that, and obviously conscious parenting as well.
Yes, absolutely. And in your book, The Psychic Children, you link it to dolphins, and of course everybody loves dolphins, but why are dolphins so key to the link between psychic children and earth energies and DNA and that kind of thing?
Well, when I was in Hawaii, I met Grandma Chandra, who's one of the sort of one of the main kind of psychic kids, I guess, indigo kids, has sort of shamanic kind of. She works in the shamanic realm as well. She claims, as to some of the other kids, that they actually are incommunicado with dolphins and whales, and there's a direct link between some of these kids, and that they can communicate constantly. It's almost like a whole other world under the oceans. And apparently, this is what I was told, that often when aliens or UFOs or extraterrestrials come and visit Earth, they're looking for the most intelligent species on Earth. So they also often go straight to the dolphins or the whales and bypass the humans, because obviously the oceans take up more space than the land does, where the humans exist on. So there's a lot to be said for that. But they claim that they work, in the same way that the psychic kids and other spiritual groups that work on land, that is also happening with the dolphins and the whales in the sea. Now, this is just what I've heard. I've got no evidence of this or anything like that, but I find that particularly kind of fascinating, that whole concept, and it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense to me. It's logical. Why not? Why not? I mean, they're very smart animals. People, smart dolphins and whales are very smart. So people know that's the case. So why not? Why can't these kids communicate with them and work with them in various ways?
Do you think it's the case also, before we move on to a different topic, Hugh, do you think it's the case that there are an increasing number of these children being born, and that it is linked to a possible kind of expanding of consciousness in a collective sense on Earth?
Yeah, it's like the 100 monkey syndrome, I guess, and hopefully, that will happen. I think it's, we've got to look at it like we are kind of one, mind as well, the human race. So it's just up to everyone individually whether they take that path, whether they're even introduced to it. I mean, some people in some countries are born into situations where they're just trying to survive constantly. They can't even worry about how spiritual they're being or how conscious they're being about certain things. They're just surviving, and this is, a lot of people seem to overlook that. But certainly, I think there's going to come a point. A lot of people were hoping it would be the whole 2012 solstice thing. Maybe something has shifted around that time. I mean, who knows? And it's just a case of individual responsibility is where it's all at, in my opinion, about being responsible for your actions, for the way you think, the way you act, the way you treat people. And I think that kind of responsibility, needs to be kind of everyone needs to do it, if there's going to be any kind of shift. And then they have to set an example. You can't just you can't try and teach kids, like, you've got to do it this way, and then they see their parents doing it a different way. You have to set the example, and I think that's obviously the key to it. I don't think it may not be a natural process. It might be. I sort of suggested in the book it might be that this could just be happening naturally. But I think there's a role. We all have a role to play. We all, create our own destiny. We create our own kind of fate. so we need to make sure it's going to happen as well.
I couldn't agree more, and I think consciousness really comes into our destiny, our fate. I used to always struggle with the idea, or the cliche, or whatever you want to call it, the old adage that you make your own luck. And throughout my life, I never understood what that was. And over the last couple of years, it kind of became clear to me in that if you set yourself up in terms of consciousness in a particular way, opportunities do become available to you when you would least expect them. And if you're observant of coincidences or apparent coincidences and any of that kind of energetic stuff that's going on in the background all the time, whether we realize it or not, we do suddenly realize that, hang on a minute, we are all connected. So if I act in a positive way towards somebody else, well, then it will come back to me in an almost karmic fashion at some point in the future or in some way. And I really agree with what you're saying there with regard to energies and how we should take personal responsibility. I don't think the onus is on Hugh Newman to do all the research and to figure out what's going on in the world. And I think we all have to do it, and we will reach the snowball effect, as some people call it. And I think we're quite close to it, and hopefully we are. But central to all of this, Hugh, and you've done huge work on it, most especially with your book Earth Grids, there is a kind of a grid that most of us are not aware of, and we're certainly never thought about this when we look at geography or history or anything like that in school. There is a grid that links all these sacred sites all over the world. I mean, everybody's heard of Stonehenge and the pyramids and places all over the world, Mexico and now Bosnia and all over the place. But they seem to be just isolated tourist traps. But that's really not the case at all. These things were built for a reason, and they do appear to be linked. Tell us a bit about your work on that.
Yeah, well, the book Earth Grids, The Secret Patterns of Gaia's Sacred Sites. Again, John Martineau was instrumental in making that happen. Obviously, I've done all the research. I was doing lectures and working a lot of the mathematics and the geometries around the planet. We eventually put that book together. Actually, John Martineau designed this world grid program, which we used for some of the research. But yeah, there's certainly something going on with these ancient sites, because there are literally millions of megalithic sites, ancient sites, pyramids, mounds, earthworks, loads of different things all over the world. I mean, every country is littered with them. There's a lot going on. Even North America, there's Korea, everywhere has them. It's just a case of knowing where they are, and a lot of them obviously have been destroyed now, which is very unfortunate, and something we do try and sort of promote and help protect any potentially sites under threat. But if you start looking at, so even in the local landscape, people can start with that. They can just map all your ancient sites in your local landscape, get an OS map, get accurate maps, just put them all together and just see if there's any patterns there, because often you'll just find patterns that are that might be random, might be chance, and that does happen. And I've seen researchers come out and get crazy about all these patterns. Some of them don't make sense, but it's when you start seeing similar number systems, similar angles, and similar geometries that are all based on harmonic numbers, or like the old canonical numbers, then that's when you take notice. That's when I take notice, is when you're looking at certain number systems, certain measurement systems, certain systems of geometry. Then you know there's something maybe going on there, and they are connected. And this can be applied globally as well. The relationship and spatial distances between sites can be quite interesting once you start looking, and it makes you wonder how they did it, because they not only were they working with latitude, which is relatively easy to do compared to longitude, which is incredibly difficult to do. It wasn't even sussed out until the marine chronometer came in, thanks to John Harrison a few hundred years ago. But somehow they were doing that in ancient times, because we have to question then how they were doing that, and were they marking certain places that they mapped with ancient sites? Was that one of their primary reasons for placing sites all around the world? Was it part of a sort of global geodetic mapping system? And that could be the case, and this is why there's some kind of order to it the more you look. but it could also have other purposes as well, because we know that there's thousands of years old kind of ancient maps, the Pires Res map, the Orontius Finicus map from the 1500s, which were compiled from many ancient, much more ancient maps that even show the outline of Antarctica, so they must be 10,000 years old, etc., etc. But there's other elements to it as well, because you can clearly, when you start looking at the sites themselves, you find the same numbers and the same measurement systems and geometries as you do on a global scale. And so you can see that there's like a sort of macrocosm, microcosm thing going on between sites and the relationship between other sites. And it's quite confusing to try and describe it on just with audio and radio. Yeah. But when you start looking at the pictures and start experimenting, you can have lots of revelations, and you can certainly do that nowadays thanks to programs like Google Earth and other apps you can even get on your iPhone and stuff like that. But there's other elements to it as well, because natural spheres that spin, especially which is like the Earth and all the planets in the solar system, actually kind of have a kind of innate geometry. Every sphere contains within it energetically the 5 platonic solids and a combination of the platonic solids, the Archimedean solids, and all their points. Like if you've got say a tetrahedron, like a small pyramid, 3-sided pyramid in a sphere, the points will touch the surface at 19.5 degrees above or below the equator, depending which way you put it in. And often you get energy anomalies on the Earth's surface at 19.5 degrees. And so you have to question, are there these sort of massive energetic geometries, spherical platonic solid geometries within the planet? And that where their points touch the surface, there's stuff going on. And this seems to be the case. There's evidence of that with the tetrahedron. There's evidence of that with the icosahedron, thanks to the early 1970s research of Ivan Sanderson. The Bermuda Triangle, Hawaii, and other places all fit onto it. The Devil's Triangle off Japan and things like this. And so there are things going on, not just from an ancient mapping system, but also from an energetic system. And then we have to question, did they kind of join the sites up with these energy lines and stimulate the sites, charge them in a certain way, possibly with sound or acoustics and things like this, and then the energy lines would naturally coming up from the Earth would be manipulated, so there was this energy system around the planet, which could have even been used for energy for powering certain things. I mean, Bruce Cathy, one of the foremost researchers from New Zealand, he claimed that they were actually powering UFOs, and they were going along these straight line paths between ancient sites in a grid system over the planet. So there's quite a lot to it, really. Just there's a quick summary, but there are other aspects obviously to it as well.
Well, it's a really good summary as well, because convention would have us believe that that basically civilizations in the past were completely disconnected from one another. They couldn't possibly have known what was going on, for example, in Africa versus what was going on in Australia. However, when we delve a little bit deeper, and we don't have to go that deep to realise it, we discover that indigenous cultures were very much au fait with what was happening on the far side of the world. Whether they were in direct contact or not, they did have a kind of a common knowledge that would have had to have been acquired in some way that we currently don't use. They didn't have televisions, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have any of that stuff and that so-called technology that we have now, but they still knew stuff that, to use our own paradigm at the minute, they shouldn't have known, but they did. So rather than overlook that, I think you've gone into a lot of depth and actually explored, you've thrown out the paradigm and you've said, right, let's accept that there is something global at work here and look into it in some detail. And I think that's the most important thing for anybody approaching this information for the first time. Just no matter what the convention or the paradigm is, set it aside for a minute. Even sometimes treat the information as if it's fiction and just look at it as a story. And quite often these revelations appear, as you described, when you started linking ley lines, for example, or different energetic points or different sacred sites on the grid. So when you started linking some of the bigger sites, shall we say, because all people are familiar with them, what did you notice? I mean, what was the frequency of what seemed to be anomalies initially but turned into patterns? I mean, was it a common thing, or did you really have to go digging?
No, I mean, you could, as long as you can go to these sites yourself and have a look, you can just see things. I mean, it's really that simple. Obviously, there's really obvious ones like stone circles, for instance. We have, over 1,000 stone circles in Peru, and all over this country. But there were stone circles all over the world. The biggest stone circle in the world, for example, is in Morocco. There's also Göbekli Tepe is stone circles. There's stone circles in Africa. There was some in Australia. They're everywhere. And there's even evidence of some in Brazil. And there's one even at Silistani in Peru. So, why would you build stone circles? There has to be a kind of, is it just by chance that they would all do the same thing? But the pattern doesn't stop with that. You look at pyramids, you find pyramid structures at many different places around the world. That, proper pyramids like the ones in Egypt, Mexico, and other places that are built from the ground up. There's obviously lots of controversy about ones like the Bosnian pyramids, which look more like a shaped hill of some sort. Yeah. But the ones built up are very similar, not only dimensions, but they have similar style, they have similar layout, orientation, and they even have, the same construction methods in some cases. Stone carving, you look at relief carving as an example. I just wrote this article about this for a couple of magazines, and you look at Göbekli Tepe, for instance. I mean, it's the subject, like, it's hard to get off. It's so interesting and important that there are these incredible relief carvings of these animals, these snakes, these foxes, these lizards and things like this. And I couldn't believe it when I went to Göbekli Tepe last year, because straight away I thought, I've seen these before. I've seen this exact style. It's almost the same artist at these 2 or 3 sites in Peru and Bolivia. Almost exactly the same. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, how can this be? How could you, if they're supposed to be thousands of years apart, thousands of miles away from each other on different sides of the world, how can they be the same? And this is something people like, obviously, Graham Hancock, who was at our Origins conference, have been, commenting on for several years now. But you go to these sites and you can see evidence of that yourself. And all these academics who try to slam Graham Hancock and others obviously haven't been to these sites, because you can see them with your own eyes. And so you can't help but take account that there was a global culture, and we know they were sailing around the world. There's evidence of that. There's evidence of navigation all over the world. I mean, I think one brilliant example that's completely overlooked by everyone really is the fact that right next to the Great Pyramid at Giza, the last remaining wonder of the world, there's 3 huge wooden boats, like almost like they could carry about 40 people. They were huge, perfectly preserved wooden boats that were deliberately buried next to the Great Pyramid, with these huge megalithic blocks covering it up. And they reconstructed. They actually broke it down when they buried it originally, and then they kind of eventually, when they rebuilt it, they realized this could sail anywhere around the world. And so even in ancient Egypt, the pyramid builders, they were sailing around the world. And they're just trying to tell us that, by leaving them right next to the pyramids. And obviously the pyramid builders were sailing around the world. So, and you can't help but notice the similarities between sites. Like in Egypt, you have these polygonal walls, these beautiful kind of irregular shaped, massive megalithic blocks. Actually, the 2 smaller pyramids on the Giza Plateau are faced with granite polygonal walls. People don't realize that either. Yeah. Which is exactly the same as you get in Peru, which is exactly the same as you get on the west coast of Italy, which is the same as you get in some parts of Saudi Arabia. It goes on and on and on. You can't help but notice these similarities just by simply looking. Then when you get into the Earth grids angle of research on it, where you start looking at the location of sites in relation to one another, patterns do often pop up. Sometimes they don't, but sometimes they do. So there's a constant, as sites are being discovered, there's more and more potential kind of, discoveries that follow on from that are still yet to be discovered.
And you mentioned that there are loads of different theories as to what the Earth grids are for and why we have these similarities all over the world. I mean, anything from flight paths for extraterrestrials to anti-gravity, all these different theories. Is there any that really kind of pops out at you, or that you get that feeling, particularly when you're at the site? Because, I mean, you've been all around the world so many times and physically at these sites. So you have a different perspective than most of the rest of us who haven't managed to do that. And you can feel things as well as just, look at information and read it in a book. So Is there anything that seems to ring true for you based on even just a hunch, or when looking at empirical evidence as well?
Well, I mean, some sites, they're high energy sites, and if you just spend a little bit of time there, you can feel that. Some have kind of been so destroyed, rebuilt, this, that, and the other. I mean, a lot of the sites I went to in the Boyne Valley in Ireland last year have been kind of almost like leveled to the ground and rebuilt again. But they still retain their energy. I mean, Knowth, for instance, still has a high energy about it. There's something about Knowth for me personally. I don't know why. It's something about it. I've had dreams about Knowth that kind of inspired me to go and visit it a few years ago. But some sites have a high energy which you can't see. There's no evidence of it. But I've been to, like, for example, I went to this Olmec site up on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, a place called La Venta, and many of the stones have been moved from La Venta, the original site. It's like a pyramid kind of site in the jungle, virtually, and moved to this park to keep them from destruction. And even when they'd been moved, there was this a huge altar stone that had all these serpents carved on it, which me and my friend I was with, he felt it as well. We could feel this energy kind of pulsing out of it, and we were like, whoa, this is incredible. And we were just standing. You could kind of walk into the energy field and walk back out of it. It was, and we were not high. There's nothing, we were not, in an altered state in any way. We were clear-headed, visiting these sites, and it blew our mind. And this has happened at many other sites I've been to as well. Not all of them, not sites you would expect things to happen, but it does happen. And I think this direct experience is, and reporting on that is actually one of the most important aspects of understanding these sites. And it's one thing we encourage, people who go to sites to tell us their experiences, and you can build up this data about it. But also there's now science which can test the energies at sites. And there's been some excellent research over the last decade or so, thanks to people like John Berg, who wrote the brilliant book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, with co-author Kaj Halberg. And that he actually used to work in the scientific research of crop circles. He applied his scientific techniques to megalithic sites, mound sites, and got incredible results that these were high energy sites. And there's something, that is one of the reasons they were built where they are, because often they're on a magnetic anomaly naturally, or they're on a conductivity discontinuity where two types of geology meet, and you have high charge of water going through underground. You have energy currents meeting and clashing and creating this kind of vortex. So this is a genuine thing, and it's not just new age nonsense. This is a genuine research area now that people can start to take seriously. And I think that's one of the overlooked aspects in archaeology and academia, which is something where we encourage that at Megalithomania. We're not just about big stones and about archaeology. No way. We want to kind of look at all these different aspects to see if we can sort of get an holistic picture of what the ancients were really up to.
Well, I find it very interesting that you mentioned Knowth as well, because I had an experience there in the last 2 years personally. And everybody's heard of Newgrange in Ireland, and that's kind of the big tourist attraction in that area. And not so many people have heard of Knowth and Douth, which are two energy sites very, very close to Newgrange. And I was there with my brother Stevie, who's producer of this show, and he had been there many times before, and he'd said, look, this place is great, we have to get there. And we went, and it was my first time, criminally, it was my first time when it's only about 2 hours drive from my home here in Ireland. And I remember I had a cold, a very heavy cold, a head cold, and I was coughing and spluttering for the week prior to it, and things had been getting worse and worse and worse. And I remember as we were there at the site, we were kind of just surveying things, and for anybody who hasn't been there, you can kind of look out at the landscape for miles and miles around. It was a very clear day, and it was a great view. And as we were there, we could feel, both of us, this energy that we didn't have before. Within an hour of leaving the site, that cold, and people can laugh at me and they can say what they like, but that cold that I had, the flu-like symptoms, which were getting worse that day, had completely and utterly gone. And to this day, I haven't had a snuffle ever since. Now, I'm not saying that anything incredible definitely happened to me. All I'm doing is recounting my experience, and it is associated with Nouth. And personally speaking, I think it had something to do with it. And the energy, or the energy that I felt on that site, has resonated with me ever since. When I think of it, I get a slight kind of again, people can say it's placebo or it's imagined or whatever, but I get this tingling, this almost like my hair standing on end when I think of Nouth or when somebody mentions it. And it's the place absolutely fascinates me, and I've had one or two of these experiences, one in Mexico as well, over the years, and I can totally relate to what it is you speak of. I mean, people need to feel these sites as well as just talk and hear about them, because that's very, very important. And as you said, a lot of the research that goes on tends to overlook that, and particularly science.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm fascinated by your story. Actually, that's a really good bit of data there. Just it's fascinating because similar thing happened to me. I'd just like to add this in here. When I was in Egypt, I got very sick in Egypt. I was there for the whole December 2012 solstice thing with Kerry Cassidy and a group of people, and we. I got very sick on the Nile cruise. I got serious food poisoning. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't eat anything for days. It wouldn't go away. I was sick. I was nauseous, I was puking, etc., etc. And we had this opportunity to go into the Great Pyramid and go to the subterranean chamber, which I'd never been to before. Right. I thought, oh, I'm so sick. I don't even know if I can walk or stay awake. It was first thing in the morning. So I thought, right, I'm going to pull myself together, be a proper megalithomaniac here. And so I got myself together. We did it. I somehow climbed down into this really long sort of diagonal passage into the subterranean chamber, and a similar thing happened to me that you had as well. I felt completely, immediately healed. I was nothing. I was not sick. I was not nauseous, and it was my whole sickness had disappeared completely. And I was like, what is going on here? Yeah. And I even, said it to my camera, my video camera, while I was there, just to, to give a bit of, feedback, so I got it recorded. And the whole time I was down there, it was about 40 minutes or something like that. I just felt completely fine. And I thought, this is weird. Is this like coincidence? Did I just happen to get better right now, as soon as I went into the lower chamber, the subterranean chamber? And then, but when I came back out, I climbed back out and got out just at the top of the chamber, still inside the pyramid, the sickness and the nausea came back. And I was like, oh, what is going on here? And it was palpable, and it's almost like I felt I had to get sick to have that experience, to find that out directly. And again, this comes back to the whole direct experience. So I question, I've really questioned that, and I really haven't got any clear answers about what could have done that. Whether it was literally the shape of the pyramid, the whole pyramid power thing, where the energies would compress down into the subterranean chamber, and that would be a neutralizing energy, and that would just temporarily put you into this sort of neutralized, healed state. It could have been you're so deep in the earth and you're away from any frequencies up on the surface, and so you're not getting affected by them. And I've heard that people who go caving and go into deep caves, they have a similar kind of thing where they feel completely pure and healed. And so it makes you question the nature of disease. Is it like a vibrational thing on the surface of the planet, if that is the case? And so that really blew my mind. So it does suggest that many of these sites, to me, it was like, well, this is like a healing space. Yeah. As well as, we know that the Great Pyramid may have had multiple other purposes, including technological and energetic purposes. But that kind of really got me, and, I still haven't really worked out exactly what happened to this day. But again, it's another bit of direct data that, like myself and yourself have actually experienced.
It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure more will unravel as we continue our journeys. Speaking of journeys, Göbekli Tepe is somewhere that you have journeyed to, and we spoke at length to Robert Schock last week about it. We had a fascinating conversation about it. What light can you shed, and what perspective have you got? Because this site, everybody's talking about it. It seems to be the single most important site for a variety of reasons in the world at the moment, in an archaeological sense and beyond. So what's your experience of Göbekli Tepe, Hugh?
Well, Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey is it's a game changer, as Graham Hancock pointed out when we went with him there last September. I mean, we're going back there in May because, you know, that is the ultimate kind of megalithic site at the moment to see in the world.
Yeah.
And it's not only one of the most beautiful and interesting, intricate carvings and these pillars and everything, it's also extremely old. It's probably the oldest known sophisticated megalithic site on the planet that's actually been carbon dated to that era, to the Mesolithic kind of era, going back, you know, 12, 13, 14,000 years even. And so it's extremely ancient. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't exist in our current paradigm of history. It just shouldn't be there. And so that's what's so compelling about it. It's a series of stone circles with these carved T-shaped pillars with these beautiful relief carvings on them. Some of them are huge high 3D reliefs of these sort of, you know, strange creatures. There's many serpents, and it's very similar to what we find in Peru. So that's why we've actually invited Brian Forrester, who's an expert in Peru and Bolivia, to actually come over to Göbekli Tepe and all the sites in Turkey with us. In late May and early June, we're doing a tour there with Andrew Collins, because, you know, it's like that thing, it's the direct experience thing. It's like, you know, we do take groups to these sites because there's a demand for it. There just is a demand. And we always want to kind of find out other people's experience there, like the experience I had in the subterranean chamber, the experience you had at Nouth. I want it, so in a way, it's almost like a research expedition every time we go there. As everywhere else we go on tours and the groups we take. And so there is something about that site, which the fact is they covered it up, makes it even more interesting because they were trying to hide it almost. Yeah. And so imagine what else has been deliberately covered up, like literally had earth put over it and shaped into a hill, so you can't even see it. It only got found by chance, really, and it was almost like a time capsule. So we have to kind of, you know, take that into consideration when you're looking at sites like this. But to me, I mean, we found a whole bunch of energy currents there. We had a few dowsers with us and geomancers there, and we kind of found some energy lines. We found this magnetic area, and so we know that it has the classic traits of like a sophisticated ancient site where they were working with the invisible energies, as well as the archaeology and the intricate stone carving is so amazing. I do recommend people visit there, and obviously people are welcome to come along with us along.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about the tours towards the end of the conversation as well. You've been doing a lot of travelling. You're just back from Australia and Tonga. What was going on out there? More discoveries?
Yeah, I mean, Australia's very interesting, actually. We met up with Steve Strong and Evan Strong, and we had a long conversation with Brett Green. And there's some good researchers out there, and there's some interesting sites being discovered up north in Queensland. Well, sort of central north in Queensland, we have the Gympie Pyramid, which is actually probably a natural earth kind of mound type thing, with these strange stone walling around them, and all these unusual Egyptian and Phoenician looking artifacts are being found there. And it was a gold mining area, so it does seem like it was used by different cultures over the millennia. Near Byron Bay, which is the cool kind of funky town similar to Glastonbury but in Australia, a place called near Mullumbimby, is this almost like a double stone circle site with quite small stones, mind you, almost like two stone circles with crosses, like a medicine wheel with an avenue between them, and also a man-made mound there as well, which Steve Strong and it took me to go and see. And it's on private land and it's not open to the public or anything, but we managed to get a chance to go and see it and film it and experience it. And then there's these Gosford hieroglyphs down near Sydney, about an hour north of Sydney, where in this random rocky outcrop in the middle of nowhere, there's 300 pretty well carved Egyptian and ancient hieroglyphs. And so it does suggest, you know, that either they're really good fakes or there was an Egyptian connection in Australia. Tonga, obviously, which is a 5-hour flight from Sydney, going directly east into the middle of the Pacific, literally in the middle of nowhere, has incredible megalithic technologies there. It has this huge trilithon, similar to what you have at Stonehenge, but much bigger. It has these pyramid platforms with these massive megalithic walls all around them. And it has some standing stones there, and a tradition that suggests that could have been the kind of primary kind of capital of ancient Lemuria, or Mu, because even the ancient capital of Tonga was called Mua, M-U, apostrophe A, which suggests that ancient connection. It's also known that Tonga and all the different islands of the Pacific were very sophisticated navigators using the stars to navigate. And so the more you look around those islands, the more you find megalithic sites. And so it's almost like that was like part of the great survey, the great grid survey of ancient times. So wherever you go, you can find interesting stuff, trust me.
So too, I suppose, the alien question. A lot of people will discount so much information because they don't want to talk about aliens, or more people will be on the other end of the scale where everything has to be linked to an extraterrestrial source. What's your position on the use for the energy grid in the past, because there obviously was some kind of use for it, and the building of all these different sites and megaliths absolutely everywhere? Do you think it's extraterrestrial in source, or do you think it might have something a little bit closer to home as the explanation ultimately?
Well, I generally think it is closer to home. I do genuinely think humans could have easily done all this. Because if we can, the technology we can do today, then we have the same brain capacity we've always had, going back tens of thousands of years. So it's quite plausible all this can be done by humans, and I don't doubt that, and I kind of sort of strongly support that idea. But a big but here, you really. Some sites you go to, like Göbekli Tepe's one, is like you just can't. It's difficult to comprehend it and to like deal with it. Yeah. It's like, how did that happen? How could they do that? You look at the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It's like, how could they even do that? Is that even possible to do that? It's almost like an impossible building. And I've talked to some architects who just say that they couldn't even do that today. Not because they don't have the technologies, because it's just too much of a job. Yeah. It would take too long. It'd be too many man hours. You'd probably mess it up. And the intricacy of some of these sites is so amazing. Such big stones, such a lot of work. It's hard to comprehend what was going on. So you could put it down to aliens. I mean, I've been on that Ancient Aliens TV show several times, but I always kind of suggest it may have been ancient aliens, but it could quite plausibly have been humans, ancient humans as well. And so it kind of we have to kind of keep bring it back down to earth, because it is totally plausible that we could do all that. It's just they've kind of almost left us a mystery. I think deliberately, because they could do it. They thought, well, those people in the future, let's freak them out. Let's build this. And so there's a little bit of that going on. I'm sure it's a bit of fun and games, as well as high technology.
And I think you touched on something very important there, and something pertinent that is, I think, brushed under the rug a lot, because people from thousands of years ago did have the same brain capacity. It's not that they were more stupid than us. It's not that they had less intellect, that they didn't have a sense of humour or anything like that. They were of the same species. And to be honest, looking at the way the world is now, they were probably far more intelligent rather than the other way around. But there does seem to be this kind of tendency. And I mean, nowhere more than school when I was growing up, when I think back now with hindsight, was this rammed down my throat. I mean, now is just the pinnacle of what humanity can be. It can only go forward. It can't possibly go backwards. And anything in the past we can kind of take with a pinch of salt or look back on and chuckle and, kind of condescend in a way. And you touched on that there, and I really, really agree with you. I think it's a very important point.
Oh, no, for sure. And I think this is also one of the problems with the way evolutionists look at history, and this is one of the issues that comes up when we find these elongated skulls, we find these giant skeletons, we find this places like Göbekli Tepe that just shouldn't be there, like 13,000 years ago or whatever, and so it's all brushed under the carpet. It doesn't fit in with the modern paradigm of the way we see history, where we're at, like you say, we're at the peak of civilization, which is nonsense. I think obviously things go in cycles, and there's so much evidence coming out, and so much has been suppressed with these giant skeletons, these long heads, the stone carving technology of Göbekli Tepe and other places, that it really needs a shake-up. And I think it's one of the roles that Megalithomania kind of has in this, is that we just, like everyone, we're just looking for the truth. We're not trying to we haven't got a grand theory we're trying to force on people. We're just saying, look, take a look at this. This doesn't make sense. Wow. So it's just, I think that approach is, like we talked about earlier, is very important. But obviously what we're taught in schools, you know, to change everything, you know, to change the whole history syllabus and rewrite the history books and the encyclopedias and all this, you know, la-di-da-di-da, and all these historians having their kind of whole work all shaken up, and, you know, it's going to take a long time for things to change, even though things are being discovered now. And I think that's why the antiquarian and megalithomaniac approach is probably, you know, a nicer way of doing it.
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned skeletons there as well, and giants. Let's talk about that just for a few minutes, because you've done quite extensive work on that end of things now as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've really got, you know, it's really to do with the megaliths, this actually, because in England and Ireland as well, in fact, you have many sites, megalithic sites and mound sites that are attributed, they were built by the giants, often in one night. You know, we know that there's so many reports, you can't deny it anymore. Problem is, you know, Smithsonian Institution were involved in all this, and they kind of disappeared. Most of these skeletons got involved. It didn't fit in with the evolution theory. It didn't fit in with their manifest destiny kind of, you know, agenda, which early Americans had, especially those involved in the Smithsonian and the government, which was to look at all previous races as savages and subhuman, almost like animals, so they could take over their land and claim ownership of the land and resources and things like this. But, you know, obviously they're not subhuman. It's completely racist and ridiculous. But even before the Native Americans, there seemed to be a race of giants who were kind of, you know, ruling the whole of North America, literally the whole lands of North America, and probably Central America and Canada as well. And that was kind of like a prime site. I mean, I've researched stuff in California, Catalina Island, all the way down to Florida, all the Ohio, Midwest, mound culture area, even New England as well, Florida. Everywhere you go, you can find these reports and you can find these ancient sites. I mean, people don't realize there's like over 100,000 recorded earthwork mounds and earthen pyramids in America. They don't realize the whole of New England has hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, megalithic chambers, standing stones, and stone circles. And so, you know, and most people in America don't even know about any of this. You know, and that's fine, but that's just the way they're being brought up. It's not their fault, you know, they're not stupid or anything like that. It's just, again, it's similar to what we've been talking about. There's like, you know, people just don't get taught these kind of things, and they just dismiss it as some Native American thing, you know, and you know, they're not interested. But actually, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of direct evidence of these skulls and skeletons, because not only the Smithsonian sort of disappeared them, there's also the Native American Graves Repatriation Act came in early 1990s, which demanded all the bones that are on display, whatever they were, get reburied and taken away. And so anything that was available to see is now being removed by them as well. So there's unfortunately like two levels of disappearance of the evidence going on there. So it's a tough nut to crack, but people like Jim Vieira and Ross Hamilton and myself have been doing our best to kind of uncover what we can.
It's interesting always when I hear about giants, because when we're children, we hear so much about giants in so-called fiction. And then, of course, you hear in the Bible about David and Goliath and all this kind of stuff. But giants seem to be ever present in all kind of fables and tales from indigenous cultures all around the world. They're completely ubiquitous. And it's only in the last kind of couple of 100 years that they seem to have been disappeared and that this idea is scoffed at. I mean, so many texts and writings from the Middle Ages and even beyond quite openly talk about these giant people and not so much skeletons, but people who roamed the earth, if you want to use that term. And all of a sudden there seemed to be a concerted effort to just, yeah, well, as you say, brush it under the carpet or the rug and forget about it. And we just can't talk about that anymore.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the thing. Anything that's kind of suppressed or brushed under the rug or kept quiet is the stuff to research. I think, you know, most of us agree on that. That's the most interesting stuff. And so that's why it's compelling people. You know, it's a big subject at the moment, this giants thing. It's huge. Well, no pun intended. But it's like, you know, it's a big story, and like it's coming out now. It's the same kind of problem with these elongated skulls they've been finding, which obviously Brian Forrester and David Childress have done some excellent research on those all around the world. It's the same thing. They're brushed under the carpet. they're suppressed. There's no one's talking about them. But this is why it takes alternative, independent researchers who have a passion for it, the antiquarian way, to bring this all out into the open, who we don't have any, we're not going to be kind of slammed by our academic peers if we step out of line from the trusted paradigm. So I think it's quite, I think that it takes, courage to kind of go ahead and push through with this, but it has to be done. And, and I think anyone anyone can be doing it. You go into your local records office, you just, subscribe to like old newspaper kind of, you can even do that on websites now, and scroll through all the old newspapers and search for giants and skeletons and double rows of teeth. You'll find stuff. I mean, there's stuff I've found personally. There's stuff even in Glastonbury I've read about. There's stuff back in my hometown near Cambridge in Cherry Hinton up on the Gog Hills. There were giant skeletons found up there in the early 1800s. So the list goes on. Again, it's like the megalithic sites, like the mountain. You can go local and you can probably find something. So I encourage people to do that, to see what we can accumulate between us.
And speaking of going local, you're quite active when it comes to, I suppose, preservation of some of these sites, because they do come under threat from time to time for nefarious or otherwise. I mean, maybe it's just ignorance on the part of a lot of establishments and councils, that kind of thing. We were speaking off air about Stonehenge and what's happening there with regard to potential building.
Yes, I mean, I was there yesterday morning for the the spring equinox, to witness the sunrise that happened behind some clouds somewhere, and didn't see a sunrise, but I was there. There's a whole bunch of druids there, and these druids are very active in this kind of realm. And a good friend of mine who's an archaeoastronomer, Simon Banton, he works at Stonehenge, so he's got the inside sort of story. And basically, the summer solstice alignment, where the sun rises and you view it from Stonehenge, right on the horizon, there's a gap called, I think it's called the Solstice Gap. And there's an area, and nothing. There's a whole military base over there, Lark Hill Military Base, MOD, Ministry of Defence, and they put these plans out on the government website. They're going to build all these houses for all the people there, right across where the sun rises when you're viewing it from Stonehenge. I think it was just ignorance. I don't think it was anything sinister. But there's been a sort of quiet campaign to actually do something about this. I've just posted, if anyone's interested, I've just posted a video up on our Megalithomania UK YouTube channel, and they can see it on megalithomania.co.uk as well. Just about, just filming the ceremony, but also talking to Simon and Arthur Pendragon, who's like a representative of the Druids, about this issue. And people can actually, check it out themselves. They can go to gov.co.uk, I think, and actually search for the Salisbury Plain Master Plan. So if you go to www.gov.uk and then go to the Salisbury Plain Master Plan, they can kind of have a look, and you can send in comments, and you can make phone calls and harass them to make sure this doesn't happen. And it closes on April the 1st, so we really have to kind of get on the case now.
And what does the future hold then for you, Hugh, both in terms of your travelling, your trips, the conferences and the research that you're doing?
Well, we've got quite a few things going on this year. We're having a break from the conference this year. We will be doing Origins conference again in November in London. That's definitely going to be happening. We've got a few tours lined up. The next one we're doing is to Göbekli Tepe and many other amazing sites all around Turkey. There's crazy underground tunnels and all this other stuff going on down there. We're going to be doing a 11 or 12 day trip starting on May the 26th with Andrew Collins and Brian Forrester. So that's people can just check that out on the website. We're doing tours around sacred ancient megalithic Wales in June, and we're doing a whole trip down the St Michael line in England, plus private access to Stonehenge in July. And then later in the year, we're going to be doing another trip to Turkey because the demand is quite high, yep. And also to Petra and Jordan, and then we head off to Italy in September. There's lots of megalithic sites, Etruscan and Pelasgian polygonal walls. That's all in September. And our annual pilgrimage to Peru and Bolivia with Brian Forrester and Freddie Silver in late October and November.
Fantastic.
Quite a lot going on.
Absolutely action-packed. It sounds brilliant.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on, and it really is, you know, we really just have a passion for it. We work with really cool tour companies who are really into all this kind of stuff. And we just, you know, people, you know, it's a way for people to go to the sites with, you know, people who know about the sites. We know all the secret little areas. We know where the earth energies are. We do a bit of dowsing. And it's just about direct experience and to have a sort of group, you know, focus. And often we, you know, people make discoveries who actually just come on the tour. So it can be quite a lot of fun as well. I mean, I just thoroughly enjoy it. And most people who come on the tour do too.
And if I had a few quid in my back pocket, which I don't, but if I did and I decided, right, I'm going to pick one, and it doesn't matter which one, what would you recommend of them all? What, for an absolute beginner, let's say somebody is hearing you speak for the very first time here today on Alchemy, and they decide, right, going to go on one of these trips, what would you recommend for them?
Oh, blimey, that's a question and a half, isn't it? It really depends on what you want. I mean, what you're into, because, you know, some people have a passion for Göbekli Tepe, others have a passion for seeing, who haven't been to England. I mean, we're going to see all the major megalithic sites in England on this summer tour in July, and go and follow these earth energy lines. So it's going to be quite a journey, that one. It really depends on your passion, and we just, you know, people. I think it's a case of come on all of them eventually, or just, you know. But Peru and Bolivia always stun me every time I go there. It's incredible. So I find that's a good one. But again, people just look at megalithomania.co.uk and just check out our tours page. They can have a good look through, and we've got videos, we've got information, and people have got reviews. People have done, so people can kind of check them out for themselves.
And Hugh, I think it'd be great to have you back on a little bit later in the year to talk about everything that is happening in your world, because there is so much. I mean, literally, we could speak here for 10 hours. And I certainly